other group, the other thing I do is poetry, Planet Poetry 28, once a month on the 28th day. I have 20 poets from all over the world join me and read for a couple of minutes while they share the poem on the screen, so you can see their craft and get a little bit more out of the poem rather than that Zoom two-dimensional look that you have to read on. And if you're interested in that, just contact me. I'll have information. Market Poet Guitar.
Hey, I am Keith David Parsons. I joined up with Mark in the portrait gallery phase of the physical meetup back when those happened. Now starting up again. I got involved in this group and a couple other groups, and poetry really was something that helped keep me from going crazy through the entire lockdown and COVID situation. And I was just delighted that as we progressed as a group, we sort of spontaneously, as I recall, decided, why don't we publish a book? And then almost as spontaneously, we sort of figured out that we had the skills and ability to do it. I mean, a member who's not with us today, Julie Bauer, was the editor. Mark knew a lot about self-publication. Dana did a website for us, and I helped with like some paperwork and nonsense. And the results, of course, are here. We named the first one Ink BLOTS Volume 1, aspirationally, but lo and behold, we stuck with it, and here is Ink BLOTS Volume 2 as well. Fingers crossed, many more to come. We're really delighted to be here and read some of our work.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. My name is Dana Gittings. I've been a part of the DC Poetry Collective for, I think, 2.5 years now. But yeah, ever since we were back in the day in person in the portrait gallery, which I miss dearly. There's definitely something different about workshopping in person and seeing people's faces. But nevertheless, we've been persisting via Zoom in the interim and still for now. But hopefully one day we'll be back in person and doing things again the old way around a table, which is, it's wonderful, but Zoom has also allowed us to connect with some other poets who aren't in the DC area. So there's, a trade-off with this whole more virtual world thing too. But anyway, I've been with the DC Poetry Collective for a while. I'm also a member of DC Writer Salon, which is another great community of poets, prose writers, novelists, really anything that gets together to work on actually writing their projects together in a nice quiet space. So those are the two groups that I'm most active in DC. And yeah, just been writing a lot of poetry and working on the same poetry manuscript for a couple of years now that I'm finally almost wrapping up. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here tonight. This is wonderful to have you all here, and excited to dive in soon to some reading.
Hello, everyone. I'm Martin Parker. I've been a bit of a language nerd since childhood, both loving to learn languages and to listen to and hear poetry. I think I wrote my first poem when I was about 11 years old. That said, over the years, I've not been a prolific poet because I seem to need the muse to come to me before I can actually write something down. But a couple of years ago, I decided I was going to start sharing it. I hadn't shared it with anybody before, and I went to Mark's group and couldn't get there very often, scheduling and so forth. But then Zoom came along and the pandemic, and I could get there every week very easily, and got more encouragement and got this book together. I'm also into drafting and graphic design, so been making these calligrams, words in different languages, creating an image like the groundhog. And then when we do the cover, we decided I would create the quill design for the cover with the words for poetry in different languages.
Yeah. I forgot to plug that when I was talking about the spontaneous generation of the book. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
But it's really been inspiring, and I'm getting me to get my poetry out there more and hopefully publish my own book.
Wonderful, thank you all. I'd like to hear you first start talking a bit about what is Ink BLOTS as a publication, both volumes, but also is there something unique that's different about Ink BLOTS Volume 2 that you want to kind of convey to your readers, to your fans here today? Also, by the way, you all are welcome to take your masks off if you'd like to speak a bit more clearly.
Oh, bless you. I've been well shot.
Sure. So one of the things that is different about both volumes of Ink BLOTS that I think is really wonderful as in our method is that instead of having sort of a overall editorial control, a lot of anthologies have a lead editor or a team of editors, and they pick what goes in it, and so it really reflects their sensibility, which is fine. But what's nice about our work is that we give each of the members exclusive editorial control over their sections. So instead of a bunch of poems that are picked by one person to sort of match each other, you get 10 distinct different segments. They reflect 10 different poets and their own inspirations and sensibilities. And so, you know, there's something truly for everyone in these books. And, you know, everyone has an opinion on different things, but if you don't like the first section, go to our next poem. We have a very diverse group.
And we each have 10 pages, which is very unique. So you really get a chance to show various, you know, you can't get it all into one poem, but in 10 pages, you get a little feel for the poet, for sure. So I think that's a great advantage as well to a lot of pages.
The other thing is we all workshop each other's poems, so we're familiar with one another's work. So we can kind of help each other out if we need help with selecting what poems we want to put in, but they've all kind of been vetted by one another in our workshops in some way. At least feedback has been provided and perspective. So there's some sort of connectedness there, and that we've all provided insight and feedback that has informed the revision process for each of our work.
And I've never been one to want to stick to one style of writing or doing anything, including my poetry. So I've included a little bit of several different kinds of poetry. Selection.
You know, workshops are difficult in that it's hard to find a good writer's workshop. I mean, sometimes you find yourself in a group where everything is emojis, thumbs up, and you find yourself in a group where it's brutal. So, you know, to find the right mix of intelligence and people who really have read poetry and understand prosody, you know, on some level, so they can discuss the poem on a variety of levels in a constructive way, you know, and all that. It's a rarity. So this group, I think, all the workshops I've been able to attend and be part of, but this one is in particular, I think, outstanding. The level of poetry is always astounding to me.
At the same time, there are people in the group that are not afraid to be brutal if necessary, but you're in a comfortable environment, so you're okay with it. I've really enjoyed some of the negative feedback I got. I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah, it's always very helpful to have those different perspectives. And on how volume 2 is different, I know for me, for my section, I'm always a little political. Volume 2 got more political for me. I don't know what might have caused any of that to occur, but I think the transitions will probably be different for each of us, because again, we have that sort of independent editorial control and selection.
We also have a few different contributors to each collection. So although I think 6 or 7 of us have at least contributed to both collections, there's a few people who are in just one or the other. So you get a taste of different poets by checking out both.
Absolutely. So we've had the privilege of hosting all 4 of you virtually for Ink BLOTS Volume 1. And I'd like to hear a little bit of insight from each of you about what it's like to bounce your ideas off of each other and how you experience each other's poetry as you're editing, as you're reviewing each other's work specifically.
Yeah, like it's really wonderful to get to know each of these people as poets, and you really do. You start to know their themes. One of our other members, Elizabeth, who's not here with us tonight, writes multiple poems about invasive plants. This is like one of her inspirations, and it's really just great to see those little idiosyncrasies in people, what inspires people. And similarly in terms of feedback, each person will give different types of feedback. I know Mark loves to say, cut the first stanza. That's a common critique from a lot of people.
Too many
but-
adjectives.
Yeah. But yeah, everyone has their own style.
For sure, yeah, the group, yeah, we all know all of our poems, but we continue to surprise each other with the styles that we bring in, which is good. And we all have different, and we share we share poets that we pick up and like, and it becomes, after a while, obviously a good workshop evolves into a sort of a collective of people, and always more people, anybody's always invited, and a workshop needs to change characters all the time in order to survive. It just, otherwise it gets too static, of course. So I always encourage, people to come. I do 2 a week with the DC Collective. Some people can make it Monday, some people make it Wednesday. And it's always a nice mix, which is good. You can come and go as you like. There's no stress and all that. So yeah.
It's also nice as a poet, at least myself, who tends to write specifically about maybe a more limited range of things, to experience other writers' poetry that's about more socio-political, art history, like some of the themes that my fellow poets write on. I get to experience more of a range and feel like I've read pieces of different collections of their work just by seeing so much of their work week to week. So that's just a really nice experience to, in some way, inform my style, I suppose, over time. But maybe outside of that, just feel like I'm more a part of understanding what else is being written out there in the community, and have the opportunity to help them refine their craft as they help me do that for my own.
It's just interesting the different perspectives you get from different people. Sometimes it's one person loves your poem, somebody hates it. So you like, okay, good to know the range of what my reactions to this poetry would be. But also that sometimes the comments are, I like the feel of this poem, except this part here doesn't fit in. You're like, yeah, you're right. That doesn't quite match that. Other times it's like, you got a little grammatical stick here. That's good to catch too. I know I do a little bit of that. Catching people's, you left to put a apostrophe in there. It's been great just to hear all the different kinds of perspectives along the line.
The comments stick with you, the distractions, even though it's like, really? Then it sticks with you. And then as you come back to the phone, you might see their point of view. And
Yes.
something which is, it's good for a poet to get that kind of feedback.
Or you might realize, despite what they said, I still like what I said.
Yeah.
Here's my reason. I don't know why I like that, because somebody else has pointed out what they feel about it.
But it's nice that we're all attuned to different things too. So I know that Keith may have this kind of feedback for a poem of mine. And if I have further questions, we can coordinate afterwards and even share some poems outside of the workshop and get more feedback from one another. And Martin may have separate feedback as well, but it's nice having that mix of feedback because you can put it all together and think about what you really want to incorporate a company.
And lastly, when we read a poem, somebody else reads your poem as well, so you can hear your poem being read in another voice, which is really important to hear. So you have somebody else might read your poem, so it's very educational.
Absolutely, thank you for that. So in the interest of giving everyone the space and time to read their poems and also discuss, because what I'd like to hear, and I think maybe we all agree, I'd love for each of you to read your selections for tonight and then discuss with each other your reactions to these works. And audience members, just know that at the end of the night, we will have plenty of time for a Q&A, so you can save your questions and for the poets, and we'll get to them. Also, for those of you watching at home, you can type your questions in the chat and we'll answer them as best as we can. But if you'd like to begin with your reading of your selections, we would be so honored to hear.
Want to go left to right, or right to left?
I don't
We
mind.
can switch up the order. You've been going.
Sure, ladies.
Yeah. Are you reading tonight too, Martin?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to go first since you're
Okay, sure.
okay?
Pardon my being close to my phone, but my cataracts make it hard for me to see. This is one of the few I've written, I think, that has a little bit of politics in it. This is the first one in the second book. It's called Like Ships That Pass. You ferried us home in your boat of a car. We'd all spent the weekend at Rehoboth afar. Dropping me off to prepare for the week, you planted a peck of farewell on my cheek. And with whiskers that bristled like those of my dad, and memories that leave me both sad and glad. We'd venture up to Penda Hill's height, center named for the mystical sight of Fox's visions and infamous trials, amid the laughter, hugs, and smiles, and bouts of delusion, a friend who'd need aid. A harrowing journey home was made. A single earring brought you out of hiding as you talked about the crushing stress of postal works and catering to your mother's quirks. Then after the loss of your mother dear, you retired to where the water was clear, or so the name on the sign would say, with a partner who called you his cubby each day. He posted the news as your lungs gave way and struggled to find the words to say. You were felled by the plague of tyrant ignored, passed in the night when the rabble stormed, the citadel shining, that ship of fools, plagued by gridlock, dysfunction, and rules that bring painful pressure but little relief to the many now feeling so much grief. I'd put aside this chiding rhyme if I could see you one last time, to wrap you in my arms like this, and let my beard brush your cheek with a kiss. It's in loving memory of David Christopher Shipp.
All right, I have a few poems I'd like to read tonight, and I'll skip this introduction that I wrote up since we already did that at the beginning and just dive right in. But I'd like to read two from our new anthology, one from our previous anthology, and then maybe a couple of others if time permits. But I don't know how much time each have. Shade is like 10 minutes, or is that too much? I'll try and go a little less than that if I can. Okay. So I'm going to start off with some that are about a little bit more painful topics and then move into the light, which is kind of the same collection or the same progression that the collection that I'm working on takes. And it's also the direction I hope we're headed in with this pandemic and some of the other horrible atrocities going on in the world right now. But start dark and then we'll get happier. Drip. 16, man of mystery, a few years older than me. Your stick-like appendages thread the needle of my intrigue, pinning me down in willing servitude till my teenage form presents as helpless, delighted on the floor. We laugh, loll, and tumble, starting a search for something. I bite too soon into a hunger that never feeds. Years pass and the body grumbles. Earthquakes and landslides abound. Blackouts plunge into the severed pupil. The broken never learn. I wipe up the mess, pull out the stopper. 3 more drinks to cross the heart and collapse. Maybe I'll fall into place this time. We meet again, destined to tangle up our time-plumped limbs. Or so I think. One quick look mistook for a long-lost flame. I say too much, bearing my soul with sharp teeth. Remember nothing. I throw in the dirty towel, made ready with misuse and defeat. Wave it in your face until you cringe. Pity the sputtering of my valves, the old grease rubbed in the elbows of the urge. The unrelenting drip, shame, watery. It's actually not from our anthology, but it's again on the darker side, so I slipped it in here. But this one is actually a found poem, which means that it was written by sort of cutting up and rearranging words and lines from a book. Since then, I've edited it quite a bit and actually added to it. But starting that way kind of helped me to break up some of my typical language and grammar barriers, and was kind of just a fun way to do something a little bit different. Carnivorous beasts. I'm sweet, sedate. I shoot straight, good date. And the minutes have not reversed what I don't want, but let him finish. I'm poke hole, pockmark. I'm salt lick, Pop-Tart. Strip me out of my yielding, used up skin before it bellies up, broke under the tongue. I'm hard pressed, I'm hounded, I'm silent, surrounded. I want the deadly sensation, a hug of solitude. Come, let us see if it will hold. I'm used, but I'm found. I'm the bow, run aground. How it would taste, the ominous sound, the end of the conversation. I'm indoor cat, I'm boredom, I'm incident post-mortem. They make moves, mince meat, they drink up, they're in heat, but footprints won't come back. Cursed to lie as whispers. Whispers are cannibals, they eat you up alive. All right, so one more from BLOTS Volume 2. And now for some transformation. Something a little bit longer. Feeding ground. Say goodbye to the ragged fiend within, that desperate drunk who rots in the daylight, picked clean by dust. You no longer need her, gnawing at your fault line, to gut you, to get by, to gouge her thorny way. A new form of absence breeds, stronger than the one who walks in her sleep, ever looping, ever fooled. A faint but fertile feeding ground pours forth from the earth, bursting with vital frenzy. Let it leach into your edges, shower your spongy growths, resurrect your stopped up rise. Let your twisted roots fumble through the topsoil and race like lightning for the skies. All right, the next one I want to read is from BLOTS Volume 1. And actually, Mark is going to accompany me on this one with some beautiful guitar music. And I'd like to take us on a little bit of a trip with this one, some travel since we've all been so confined. Below the belt. As the dust breathes in our hideout between the hemispheres, I invoke your living ghost. A journey through time and a far off place, a casting off and a reeling in. The ship that sailed with the heat rising off our backs. A jaguar and a fish out of water. Two rivers and one raw seam, running shallow, reaching deep, stopping short. Left with a swift hug and a hole where the heart should be. Weeks later and worlds apart, nothing but water and sky to bind our far-flung bodies, plagued with raw want, a rude awakening, and sweet, sweet memory, a circus of vine-ripe, vicious visions, torturing through the mind. The end of a new beginning, the shock of an endless thirst, the nest egg tossed at a lump sum of nothing, half a planet, an empty cup. That was beautiful. Next, I'll make everyone cry. Not really, but this poem is called Ecstatic Tears. Oh, I love to cry ecstatic tears. Once a month or twice is my arranged treatment. Fill my mouth with any strong feeling, sweet or bitter, and I break. Give me that blessing of being grateful to have tripped through the grotesque tumble of drunk apathy, guzzling to a choke, revived in the divine sunshine of tears. I've stirred from the bed blind, body burned in the fire of half-remembered, half-acted horrors, where all that moved my feet was to forget what it felt to feel. I want to feel in full, far-fleshed and infinite. Give me that great welling in the eye, that stupefy until the head leans forth, beholding the heart that finally, feelingly knows that it wants to be. And finally, I am a poet who likes to write about the writing process. I have far too many poems on that subject. So the last poem I'll read tonight is called Words. Words, those ancient drums, spur my flesh to dance in circles through the shock of birth. They weave like a drug, carving through the blood, quaking through the knees. They speak with compulsion, sparking a convulsion, straining to take seed. They pulse with every spawning sound, seized in a fever, sown in the ground. They sprout to sing out and dance devout, to stand strong, to belong in this shrieking song. They seek to be found, to ring, to resound in the meat of these bones where life goes around, around, around.
It's wonderful, Dana.
Thank you.
All right, I am going to do one from volume 1. And one of the things I like to do is write poems about streets and places in DC. So this one is called Harvard Street Northwest. It is cool for an August day. Overcast clouds clad in mild roiling, their canopy keeping energy close to the earth. A boy on a bike whips round the corner, black bangs flapping. I can hear on the breeze police sirens luring us onto the rocks. There was kettling 2 nights ago, arrests by the plaza, graffiti on the crosswalk, white stripes set off black words. This morning, a protest after the Postmaster General admitted the removal of sorting machines, depositories, and employees was for real to fuck the election. Blue lives matter, but not blue boxes. But still, the storm is corked in a vital bottle of low pressure or false faith. The cinders ceiling of sky, channeling the chaos into a boy's hair, like the breath of fall, or breath of the fall, or both. Now for volume 2. Breathtaking. The tallest Gothic cathedral fell twice in construction. Its choir collapsed, that place to sing. The tender arches could not hold. Forces like wind and gravity, absent their effects, can be invisible, even deniable, but still as implacable as a blue knee on a black neck. The stake. It has been a month and a day since you broke the polite fence, smashed the insistent windows, and raped the US Capitol. Your casual rebellion chanting an alphabet from animal hides to zip tie cuffs to put a bullet in Nancy's brain to stop her squirming. Now a 6-mile fortress crowns Capitol Hill. Trenches of fences surround streets, while the dozen guardsmen every block sling full stock automatic assault rifles like talismans around their necks, warding off that freedom you wanted to impose at the point of a spear. You tell yourself, this too will pass. Someday the fence will be slightly smaller and wrought iron with pretty finials, a plaque to commemorate this moment. And when a wide-eyed child of a better time asks, you will wanly smile, look down away, and say, it was a mistake. Or perhaps I didn't approve of that. And yet, you were there. You were there. Father, you were there, but left before the smashing. Uncle, you were there, but only on Facebook, meme-poning the Clintons and snarking Biden's speech gaffes. High school friends, you were there, pretending it was okay as your congressmen keep cuffing my city, ripping away my vote each day, building Fort Freedom on the Hill, while my MPD saved our democracy from your dumbassery. Yet you have the temerity to mouth mistakes were made. It was a mistake when the founders kept slaves, compromising 3/5 of the fabric of our country. It was a mistake to be proud of Proud Boys, to wax on about heritage, not hate, when the heritage was treason. George Floyd's esophageal collapse was a mistake longer than 2 commercial breaks. But let's be frank, mistake would mean you didn't mean it when you covered for a madman who sicked a mad mob to soothe his peak, when you nattered about unity to duck justice, would mean Washington accidentally kept his slaves his whole life. And of course, you did it as purposefully as that crowd quenched Officer Sicknick's flame with a fire extinguisher. None of the horror show you perpetrated was a mistake. The only mistake would be letting you get away with it. Black Lives Matter Plaza, Northwest. I saw a baby Trump balloon floating to the stratosphere on November 7th, 2020, while the crowd sang, hey, 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 goodbye. And for a moment, it was enough.
I guess then I had different things planned, but I'll continue a little bit with the political aspect. I have a book coming out in about 3 weeks. It's called Reflections in the Time of Trumpius Maximus. And it's about 50 poems written over the 4 years, about one a month. It's just what it felt like. This one was from April 2019. I guess those you might recognize some of Eliot's Wasteland in here. Trumpius is mad again. April was too cruel. He's up to 50 tweets before breakfast. He's a tweet machine. Sweet revenge is all that he can think. Like a medieval king, he sets the stage, pounds his decimal with madness and rage. He's fed up with this phony plate, inflated statistic, the testing obscene, the White House now in quarantine. He takes aim at his enemies. He's the brand of his own disease, an addiction to a sweet nicotine, to the mortally dead and morbidly obese. Sitting by their old Victrolas with cell phones on their laps, petting them like purring cats, while soothsayers interpret the signs. Conspiracy, deceit, deep state crimes, inventing truth between the lines. If he could just cut out their tongues, the scientists, the press, the scum, forget that Blacko virus, it's over and done. Why, then I'll fit you. Trumpius is mad again, delirious, disoriented, demented. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. guess I'll get my mandatory poem about death out. Death, don't you dare. It's not death I fear. I have, after all, come to terms with nightly visits to its dreamy sidekick. I have no free will. My brain concocts a landscape of unfamiliar collages, unremembered. How should death be any different? At my bedside is the fantastic fairy tale I'm reading. I have a few chapters left, and how will it all end? Will it be bacchanal and extravaganza, or philosophizing not so happily ever after? You must agree, for this alone I need to be alive, but to die in the middle of this story, oh come now, death, and reasonable cruelty, how could you send me to that starry oblivion, not knowing the magic spell was broken? And yes, I'm off to the concert hall again, yet another resurrection symphony. I'm urgently trying to cup the magic moments like passport stamps or vouchers. There is still space in the carry-on luggage that I'm packing to be with me in the grave. But also, I keep reminding myself, day after day, I keep reminding myself, it's been 50 years since I've read Rimbaud or Blake. I must go back to have them fresh in my mind before I'll accept anything singularly disruptive as death. And I guess I'll end with a more recent poem. This was the last poem I put in this book. This was from that in March of 21, when the NASA preservance transmitted sounds from the wind from Mars. It's called The Wind of Mars. Could we please have a short pause without a single advertisement, either subliminally or with jingles? No selfies and no tweets about Mr. Potato Head. No opinion polls of how to find redemption. No more anger spit from dry mouths. No canceling celebrities for a bad hair day. No revenges to cut like a wedding cake of blood. No bloggers, politicos, stunt-bringing conspiracies. No chatter to put in a meat grinder. No haywire bazaars and mirrored ball confusions. No banging drums or Jesus rock and roll. Could we please be amazed with our wildness and love of wilderness? Tell the world to shut the fuck up and listen to the wind on Mars. For a short and unrehearsed moment, hear another planet's loneliness and its howls of wailing confession. It sounds just like us. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for that. I'm so floored by the amount of talent on the table today. I'd love to hear, because you all have worked so closely together on putting these books together and you have read each other's poetry a lot, I'm curious to hear about what you have internalized about each other's poetry, especially the poems that were read tonight, and sort of any reflections that come to mind after hearing them live again today.
So I think I might have heard a Trumpiest poem on the second time I came to the portrait gallery. I don't remember if it was that one, but it may have been. And so that's been a very interesting project that Mark's been working on. You know, not every time he comes, but like every week or two, a Trumpiest poem. So it's been interesting seeing that project, and I love the politics. I like when Mark gets political too.
Yeah, it's nice to see the collection of themes that we all kind of work around. Like he is working on this Branculia collection, which is super imaginative, alternative society. I would say like almost sci-fi-esque, with invented words, characters, the whole mythology surrounding it. So to see all of this kind of presented in poems each week and see the society coming together, you start to visualize the collection. You're like, oh, this is a really cool thing that this person who I workshop with is putting together. So to see things like that each week is kind of a really nice piece of our poetry, and to see the range of work that everybody puts together too. Like Martin, nobody writes a memoir poem like Martin. He's got so many lovely ones, and they all go through all these rich details of people's lives and
all the really specific memories that you have that are pieced together in such a neat way. So it's really cool to see the way each of us do things like that. It's very personal, but to be able to experience that.
You bring sometimes very dark mood, and sometimes you bring a very giddy
Yeah.
and sometimes erotic and sensual mood. And so all the different moods, you get to know, well, a person is so many different poems, of course, and so you get to see different aspects of all of us,
Yeah.
which come out. Absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes get asked, so who died this week? But I just, there's something that came to me a while back, writing elegies for people that are passed on, but it's just so fascinating to see the differences in what people focus on. I like how Keith does often have poems about hiking in the woods. Just some of that resonates with some of my childhood. And Mark just brings in so many references to classic poets that it's just interesting to hear how those echo through his works. Dana's just such visceral imagery, playing with words and ways, but bringing out vibrant, colorful pictures of both happy times and sad times, and things that she's been through.
You know, with Martin, I like to count syllables and stresses, cups and lungs.
Yeah, I like how Martin's details, like Dana said, they are very specific. You know, as he's reading it, that every line is an actual memory of this person, and yet they obtain a sort of universality in the way that he puts them together, and they're not specific enough for you to know. You only know that he knows, that the author of the poem knows and is referring to this person, but they blend together in a very wonderful way in that manner.
Yeah, Keith has actually mentioned I should have footnotes. More often than I do have footnotes. So
A director's cut or something.
But there's a niceness about how each line, you have sort of a very specific form that you've invented, where each line is a specific memory. So there's a inherent pause in the way that you read it, in the way that it's the content, and sometimes even the shape of the poetry moves in the shape of the memory as well. And Martin does other great shape poetry as well, including the visual art that he's wearing that he designed as well, but his poetry as well. He's very good with concrete forms and inventing languages within languages, wordplay, and all this really inventive, wonderful stuff that you could probably explain better than I can.
Dana has done some concrete poetry too.
A little bit.
And other people in the group, it's interesting to see the different forms. How some of us like stuff that rhymes. One member of the group, Vadim, who his motto is every poem should rhyme. So just about everything he writes rhymes, and it's amazing. Even though English isn't his first language, it rhymes very well, and it's very powerful in English.
Yeah, and I mean, I've read at least one version of the whole manuscript of Dana's work, and excerpts of it are in the books. And when it is finished, it's going to be epic. So if you want like the preview, you want the taster, get the books, and stay in touch. I think you probably have like email and Twitter or something. Stay in touch, because Dana will be dropping this sort of emotional galaxy spanning book at some point.
Yeah, I think there's a certain commonality about the work that we have, in that it's neither the, I mean, a lot of poetry groups publish anthologies, obviously, and there's some, and there are also good publications that are around, the Copper with Nichols and all the rest of those. There's a whole bunch of them. And I think this group tends to hit right the sweet spot between being too abstract and too accessible. And so to me, that's the spot where poetry wants to survive today. If you start getting into the poems of the majors, the New Yorkers and Poetry Magazine, if anybody can tell me what the poem is about, I'm very happy. And then you can go to some of the other collectors that you see, and they become a little bit on the cliche side. So they're just telling you too much. So here there's just the right mix. I think that's what we kind of gear our attention to.
There are times I know that Mark has told me that he has no clue what my poem about it. So sometimes
I'm not afraid to say that.
No, I mean, it's great to get any feedback like that, because either it makes you think, oh, I do need to work on this poem some more, or like, yes, that's what I was going for.
Sometimes you want a level of obscurity, and sometimes 10 minutes of time in a workshop setting is not enough for somebody to sit with a poem and get what you want out of it. So to think about that too.
Yeah, the right size group, it just kind of works itself out most of the time, 8 to 10. Because this way you can spend like a good 10 minutes on everybody's poem. After 2 hours, you kind of spend, you know, and so you're just not giving it your best stuff. So that's it gives everybody about, you know, a good 10 minutes. Some will take a little less, a little bit more. So you're not rushing through and all that. And it just kind of works itself out that way. It seems it's well done.
Wonderful. I'll have one more question from me, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. So if you have a question in the audience, you know, prepare it in your brain and get ready. And those of you who are watching at home, you can type your question in the chat. But my question for you, it's very simple, but maybe you have a lot of surprising answers, are what are some of the reactions outside of your found family of the DC Poetry Collective? What are some reactions to these works that have surprised you outside of your review group?
Oh, well, for myself, I'm a Zoom poet now. I mean, I just got into it, and I attend a couple a week. They're all over the world, you know, and you kind of sign up to find them on Eventbrite. And after a while, you become, if you find a group that you really like, I found one from San Francisco on Thursday nights, which I love, you know, like that. And it just reads. You get a whole bunch of really good poets. And I think the what I've been reading of my stuff has been well received. It's a little less performance based than some of the others, but I've been sharing the screen, and for me, it's been good. You know, very good response. You know, I'm probably a lot older than most of the people there. Maybe I've been writing a little longer. It's a little bit younger crowd on you know, on the Zoom channels. But I find it totally invigorating to be around these young poets too.
Most of the feedback I've gotten on my poetry outside of our group is from the other writing group I'm in that I mentioned, DC Writer Salon, and that's mostly prose writers. There's a few poets among us, but we do a workshop night a couple times a quarter. And it's funny, the prose writers always preface their feedback by saying, I'm not a poetry person, but, or I'm not a poet, but I hope my feedback is good enough. And then they give this great feedback that's just from like a slightly different angle than like poets might have provided feedback on. So I think what's nice is that I really think anyone can understand and appreciate poetry. It just takes sitting with it and making an attempt to understand it and explain what you read. So it's been nice to see people who think that they're not getting it or not going to be able to give you rich feedback realize that they're actually very competent at doing that and got all the themes that you wanted out of it, and also have some insightful things to share about what you could do to improve your work. So that's been a nice experience for me when it comes to feedback outside of our tight-knit community.
Yeah, I did the same thing as Dana. I took some of those Tranquilia poems that she mentioned to a fiction writing group. And I warned them. I was like, hey, can I bring my poetry to your fiction writing group? They're like, go for it. And they did really like it, and they were able to provide valuable insight. They, you know, surprisingly enough, they were providing insight on how they held together, whether they were coherent as a narrative, whether more explanation was needed. And, you know, more generally, and sort of going back to what we talked about with clarity versus obscurity, I love it when somebody reads a poem of mine and says, oh yeah, this means such and such. And it's nothing like what I like. It's just absolutely off the wall. It's like, this is about Great Britain in, you know, 1912, and I'm like, yes. But in a way, that's true, right? Because when you let a work out into the world, you're not going to be there reading over everyone's shoulder, being like, well, actually, the boy's hair represents, you know, American society. And, you know, you can't police that. And your words really do take on a life of their own. They belong to the reader, and whatever the reader can bring from them is what they mean.
I've found interesting the various responses I get two groups I've gotten from with my family, who some of them just like, oh, they don't get the poetry thing, but it's always nice to read about one of our relatives, but don't quite get it. But and coming from that, it's been great to go to some of these open mics like Mark has been saying, and just getting people, it's just getting feedback that they like the way the poem sounds and they like the way you deliver it, and getting more practice and getting more people saying, okay, you're doing it better now than you did before. Just getting the confidence to be able to share it in your own voice and understand how to do it in your own voice, and get gradually more feedback that says, yeah, you're learning how to do this.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. The floor is now open for questions if you have any. Please.
You said the words belong to the reader. Are any of you ever surprised by your own works when you revisit them?
Yeah, I mean, and it's nice, right? Because you set it aside until you forget it. And that's the best time to go back to it, where you're just going through your files and you're like, wait, what is this? Did I write this? And then you like open it up and it'll sort of unfold in a whole different way for you. And it's really a nice experience.
That actually reminds me of something I just read in the introduction to a anthology of poems by Melissa Broder. I don't know if anyone's heard of her, but she's an excellent poet. And she put out this anthology of works from her previous collections in March. And the introduction reads something like, as of March 20-something, 2021, I have no idea how to write a poem. I have no idea how the poems in this collection came to be. I hope that you enjoy the poems that were written by someone who I'm told is me. Something like that. Like, that's very relatable, especially for me in particular during this pandemic, because I have not been as fruitful. I've been mostly revising the poems that I've already written and haven't had as many ideas. We're in such a strange time, all of that. But it's easy to start to feel dissociated from your work. And then when you come back to it, it can be surprising. It's like, oh, I wrote these good words and I still have the ability to refine them at least. So you're never like fully separated from your poetry, but it can be surprising sometimes to see what you wrote and to appreciate it or sometimes hate it. Yeah, it's a weird experience.
Caught between, that's an interesting question, because I mean, all good poets revise their work a lot, and you revise, and then some days you come to it and like you feel like Cézanne and you just want to burn everything that you own. And then there are other days when you come to it and you say, well, it's really not that bad. And this one is good. But then especially when you read, like Poetry Magazine, you come to your own service, I'm a good poet. Right? But like that, I guess. But there are if I had to split it up, what percentage of the time I think I'm a very good poet, and other times I think I stink. I love that.
Honestly, the one I brought to the group this past week is one that I had been looking at thinking, oh, that's not good enough to share with the group yet. And then I sat down and read it this week because I haven't been having much inspiration lately, so I didn't have any new ones. And I'm like, this actually isn't as bad as I remembered. So
those are the good times.
And then, I got constructive feedback on why certain parts didn't quite sound right. And I think it might actually be a good poem, actually.
A couple of tequilas, actually.
It's funny, I also get a little bit of imposter syndrome sometimes in my own work, because I go through phases of writing more and writing less, and it has to do with what I'm going through emotionally or what's going on in my life. So you start to feel like, did I write that? Am I good enough? Did I, at times you feel more connected to it.
I suppose all artists, composers and artists, that's obviously go through the same thing as you evolve, and poetry is a little harder to tell how you're evolving, because you can see it in painting, obviously it's visual. In poetry, there's forms and stuff like that. It's ideas and you, and poetry is something you take with you, shopping in the store. You're painting, and with poetry, it's just like the words, they just don't give you any peace.
I see another question here.
Well, it's not really a question. It's just me commenting on your comment. But it sounds like it's just resembles life relationships. It's stagnant. You're not doing anything, but most relationships are moving. And it sounds like this poetry belongs not just to the reader, but to the moment. And how you interpret in that moment, whether it's you or the reader. And I love your expression. It just gives it that much even more life, you know. So it's, everything is, you know, even how the reader reads it themselves, you know, what effort they put into it, they change the meaning in a way.
You know, I mean, a lot of the poetry today, especially on because of COVID, is very, you know, bibliotherapy oriented, and you have to be respectful of that. Of course, you know, I mean, all the rest. So many people are, you know, just down and suffering today. You know, just the moods and all the rest of it. And poetry has become a way for them, and that's what it's there for, and that's part of poetry. But it's not the craft has to. You know, it's a question of, you know, marrying that with the craft of poetry, not just making a speech, you know, or a journal entry. So it's, that's, you know, that's the art part. So I got all poets out here, mostly, all writing poetry to some extent, or just reading, or hopefully reading. And listening. Well, anyway, the fact that you're here is just, you know, not no squares. Just,
We have a few more minutes, so if we have any more questions, please.
I'm intrigued by the once a month Trumpian poems, but not that I want to hear them or be reminded of all that. But were you able to find a lot of range to write, or all the poems similar to the one you read? Oh no, very much. It's a combination. I've got sonnets, villanelles, all kinds of blank verse, prose poems, prophetic kind of poems, biblical style. I try to pick up the style of Horace in one. You know, I realize that writing political poetry is very hard. You know, you don't want to. It's hard to separate it from propaganda and all the rest. You don't want to be too over the top and all that. There are some that are rants, obviously, but there are others where you can really try to get something out of the poem where the poem expands and is a poem. That was the largest challenge of this book. You know, there was I think I forgot the name of the actor. He had this book about Humpty Trumpty, you know, and it's all like these lines, you know, it's very cute little rhymes. They're good, you know, but there's been no real attempt at writing poetry, just how the mood, what I wanted to do is capture the mood, how I felt that month, 2019, 2021, and what was going on was part of it, and also part of how I was reacting to it. I tried to keep that as a historical document, you know, like one of the World War I or the 60s, you know, poets would capture the moment in terms of the mood, so I can look back on it and say this is what it felt to me in poetry, real poetry, at least some of it. That was the attempt.
Styles have been different. It's interesting how it's.
Some of it's obviously humorous, but not some is very serious. Obviously.
Having read a lot of those poems too, what's nice is that, well, maybe not nice, but looking back, it's okay. But every month, so many crazy things happened that there was enough content to fill a long poem with what wild things happened that month and to string them together in a creative way.
Okay, so I finished. I finished the book after the inauguration. It's done. I wrote my postscript. And then 6 weeks later, I had to write more. I wrote a couple of more poems after the 6th. You know, you just can't let that go. It's just too much seething in you. You know, it's like it's food poisoning. You just have to let it out. So. Like that.
And I do think, as you mentioned, having the different styles in there too, and the different forms. Mark is our resident expert on forms and has written many poems in all of them. But that kind of keeps them all fresh as well. And you're bringing in allegory and doing a lot of creative additional things besides reciting the crazy things that happened that month.
We have time for one more question. I think I saw you had your hand up.
I believe you touched on it, but I'm interested to hear from each of you how, you know, the last year or two now impacted your creativity, and whether that confinement was inspiring or challenging.
So it went in different waves at different times. There was definitely a period of just like dearth, you know, you feel depressed, you don't feel like anything inspires you because everything is depressing. But eventually I sort of acclimatized to it, and it ended up being very, very productive towards the end. Like I keep a running tally of how many poems I do in a month. And towards, I guess, March of this year, I did 16 in a month in that month, which was which is a lot. I mean, it depends on who you are as a writer and a poet. But for me, that was like the most I'd ever done. I was like, this is amazing. And so just to push myself further, in April, I wrote a poem a day because it's poetry month in April. I don't know what greeting card company decided that, but so I wrote a poem a day inspired by prompts. I asked my friends, some of who are here tonight, to give me random words, and I would get 2 words, one from each friend, and I'd write a poem and try to bring them together. And none of those made it into these yet because of when I wrote them versus when we were putting together volume 2, which I guess was finalized in early to mid-May. But they are great poems, and I'm looking forward to finding places.
For me, the period was both. I think the confinement, it allowed me a little bit of extra time, staying up late at night because where am I going in the morning, and finding that time. So I would say, yeah, and plus, sadness and grief go well with the muse. I mean, the muse picks up on that, right? So to some extent, you don't have to go searching. You don't have to look for the. You don't have to wait for the inspiration. It's right in front of you. So I think that to some extent, yeah, I think a lot more people. Obviously, there's been a lot of articles in all the newspapers about how much people are getting into poetry now. Some level of poetry, no matter what it is, the fact they're using the P word, on any level, is just after what we've been through in the last half century of poetry. So it is, I think, very encouraging. COVID definitely has put the world together, as I was saying at the beginning, worldwide. The global networks of poetry now are just exploding, on Eventbrite and YouTube and all the other platforms that will open. So I think, yeah, in some way, it will have been a catalyst towards creativity.
That's great. I think for me, it has been less a catalyst for writing new poems. I've felt a little less inspired, but I think it has less to do with COVID and more to do with the fact that my poems are about things that I'm going through in life. And I just happen to have had a little smoother period the last few years, which is good, but probably because nothing's happened. I've been stuck in my home, but it's allowed me more time to focus on refining the collection of poems that I've already written, and allowing me to really look at those with a more critical eye and just do something that uses a different part of my brain as opposed to writing new things. I know that will come again when the time is right, but yeah, so I've been spending more time resequencing my collection, getting feedback from friends and fellow writers, and incorporating that, and just using it as more of a time to work on and really improve what I already have, as opposed to writing a lot of new stuff. And occasionally writing new poems, but that hasn't been my focus as much with during the pandemic.
Yeah, I've found that everything going to Zoom actually helped me. I was just beginning to feel comfortable putting my poetry out there in person. But being an introvert, being able to suddenly do it on Zoom every week just really brought up my confidence. This might be worth stuff might be worth sharing. I've found I've gone through similar cycles as usual, but maybe more rapidly, of being inspired for a while and then not being inspired for a while. But the biggest example of the way the pandemic has hit me was that poem I read. I think it's the only poem of that length and that being complete that I've done in 2 days, because I learned on the night of January 6th that my friend had died of COVID. And that just brought up so much emotion that just came out of me in a couple of days. And, even almost completely forward-headed, which is very unusual.
Thank you all. This has been such a wonderful conversation. Your poetry was a delight to listen to. So if you all will join me, I'd like to thank you again so much. Very lastly, you all are welcome to stay and mingle for another 20 to 30 minutes. There is wine and cookies and all that stuff up there if you want to take a little sip. There's water as well for those of you who are not drinking wine. And before we close out officially, I know that iNK BLOTS Volume 2 is a fundraiser. So if you'd like to talk about the cause for which this is a fundraiser.
Yeah.
We had Elizabeth here.
I know.
Do it a little better than
Yeah, so for volume 1, we did Bread for the City. We donated our profits to Bread for the City. And for volume 2, we're donating to the Arch of the greater Washington, D.C. area. And it is Elizabeth is the one that suggested it and had a direct connection to it. It's for persons with disabilities, and
It's sort of giving them a home environment to be able to learn how to deal with life.
yeah.
Yeah.
We have someone here who's from Lush, actually.
Oh.
So
Oh,
There we
well,
go.
yes.
Yeah, I was hoping to see Elizabeth here, but I know that she's not here. Yes, so I work at Large. We are a community of people with and without intellectual disabilities. So we do direct support for adults with disabilities, along with education, advocacy, and outreach, all about inclusivity and equitable living. So we have 2 homes actually right here, right down the street in Ontario, where people live. And usually we're happy to invite people into our homes to hang out. Right now it's COVID, so we can't do that. But we are so grateful to have some donations from this book. Thank you.
Yes.
thank you all again. And with that, let's, mingle. Also, be sure to grab your copy of Ink BLOTS Volume 2. We have plenty more downstairs, but I think the poets are available for signing. Is that what I
Yeah,
heard?
I'll sign.
Oh, yeah, hey.
That's right. You buy it, I'll sign.